Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to look at the components of DBMS. Having looked at the components of DBMS environment, and you should note that this is the components of a DBMS as a software. The other one was components of a DBMS environment, or what we require for the DBMS to execute and give us to a database to execute and give us the best results. And this way we had the human side and the machine side, and you also had the data. You should know by now that the DBMS is a very complex software with so many pieces of software that give us services, and we've already seen those services and the various facilities that will allow the DBMS be able to give us those services. The DBMS, though, the structure of DBMS will vary from one DBMS to the other. For example, the structure of Microsoft Access is very much different from the structure of MySQL. The same case is too different from the structure of Oracle, and so on. So this structure that we're going to look at today is very much specific to the Oracle DBMS. They may be having a very little variation, but most of the major components, they are the same. So a DBMS is made up, or as a software, is made up of several components or several modules, and each of them is assigned a specific function. And we should be looking at those functions or as those at those modules, and do what and give the specification of each, or what each of them does. It is also worth noting that some functions of the DBMS must be supported by the underlying operating system. And as we said, each DBMS has a specific softwares that or software requirements in terms of operating system that it runs based in. But the OS will only provide the basic services, but the DBMS will be running on top of it. So some of the components that we do have for the DBMS, we have such the user queries, the access methods, or the file management techniques. How do we get the data from the DBMS and so on? And those two are some of the interfaces that we do have in the DBMS. Allow me to start with this diagram over here, and maybe explain what is happening in it. This diagram shows the major components of DBMS, and this big rectangle over here, as you can see it, is the DBMS. On top here, we have the various users that may be accessing the database through the DBMS, and some of them are programmers who are accessing the database through application programs. We have users who are accessing the database through queries. We have database administrators who are accessing the data or the database through database schemas, because they are the designers. They have or they can make several, or they can access more information than we can do. So the DBMS generally has six components which will make it up. One, we have the DML preprocessor. that is a data manipulation language preprocessor. We're going to look at it more, what it does. You also have query processor. We have the DDL compiler, or data definition language compiler. Remember, the database the DBAs are much concerned with the design, defining the data in the database, and so on. So they require the DDL or data definition language statements. So you have a compiler that will be able to interpret them. Then you have the application programmers will be able to manipulate the data, operating the data, and so on. We have the program object code. You also have the database manager. This is one of the major components that we have in the DBMS. And I believe down here we shall be looking at what makes up the database manager. It has a lot of functions in it. For the side of the DBA, with DDL, they're able to define, to come up with the data dictionary. You also refer to it as the database schema or system schema. Sometimes you refer to it as the metadata. So this is the component that will be assisting them work with it. That is the DDL, or the dictionary manager. This component, we also refer to it as the catalog manager, or the system catalog manager. You also refer to it as the metadata manager. This component that we do have over here. Below the DBMS, we have the underlying database. The underlying database, before you can access the database, we have several other components that are involved in this environment. We have the file manager. We have some access methods. How do we access the data in the database? Or will assist us access the data in the database? And we also have the system buffers. All these will be used when you're accessing the data. And down here, you should be looking at how they are related to one another. Then below here, we have the database itself, and also the system catalog, or the metadata. That is the database that contains the data, or the operational data, and the metadata. Allow us to look at the first component of the DBMS. That's the query. That is the query processor. So the query processor will be able to yes, thank you. The query processor, this is a major component of the DBMS that transforms queries into low-level instructions directed to the database manager. So the query processor, or the queries that are coming from the various users, will come in form of high-level language. And for them to be processed, they must be converted into the low-level language. And remember, as we are dealing with the operating system, in our module 1, we say that instructions that are directed to the hardware must be always in low-level language. So these queries that are coming from the various users, and they are coming in form of high-level language, they must be transformed, or they must be translated into the low-level instructions, or into low-level language, and they are then sent to the database manager. The other component of the DBMS is the database manager, and as I've said, it is a major component of the DBMS. It is one of the major component of the DBMS. It acts as the intermediate between the database itself and the various users, be it the normal users, the programmers, and also the DBA. They all interact with the database through this component that we refer to as the database manager, or the DM. So the DM interfaces the user submitted application programs and queries with the database. So it is an interface between the application programs and the queries that are coming in, and also with the database itself. And this is what it does. The DM or the database manager accepts queries and examines the external and the conceptual schema to determine what conceptual records are required to satisfy those requests. So it will examine and maybe try to determine which are these records, or which are the exact records do you want to see, or do the users want. For example, I want in a database of over 18,000 students, I want to get details of a single student, or exam results of a single student. So that request will be received by the database manager. It will examine and be able to determine which records it will be able to, or that will be able to satisfy the request that I've made. Then it will make a call to the file manager to perform the request. In other words, it will be able to interpret whatever the data is, the exact data, the data that is required, and it will be able to send that request to the file manager in an interpreted way. And as you have said, we are going to have a more detailed look into the database manager, because it is made up of very many components. The other component is the file manager. The file manager manipulates the underlying storage files and manages to allocate storage to the spaces. So the file manager will be able to manage the files. Remember, you said the database is a collection of files, though they are treated as a single entity, and it will be able to manage the free space allocation. Or when you add some data into the database, they need to be allocated a physical storage. When you delete some data from the database, wherever that data was stored need to be freed up and be allocated whenever a request comes in or a new data comes in. So it is also, or the database or the file manager will also be able to establish and maintain list of the structures and the indices defined by the internal schema. So it's able to maintain the indices, to maintain the structures of the data, that is stored within the database. It is also, apart from storing the indices, it also stores the hashes. If the file we're having, or that is, if the file are hashed files, then the database is able to do what to, or the file manager is able to store those hashes. The file manager does not manage the physical and logic, or that is the physical input and output of the data into the database, but it will pass those requests to the various access methods, which we either read the data into the system buffer or into the cache. And I think that one is very clear in the diagram that we have up here, that the file manager does not, this file manager up here does not directly interact with the database. It has, in between it, we have some access methods, and we also have some system buffers or system caches that will be able to assist, or that will be able to, or come in between the file manager and the database. The other component that you do have is the DML preprocessor. And as the name suggests, it will be able to convert DML statement, or data manipulation language statements that are embedded in the application programs into standard function calls in the host program. These are requests that are coming through application programs, maybe in C++, in Visual Basic. You've developed your application in C++, in Visual Basic. So those DML statements are coming in that language, but you're using a Microsoft Access database. Those databases, or those instructions cannot be understood by Microsoft Access. So they must be converted, or those DML statements that are coming in must be converted into language or standard function calls of the host language. And DML preprocessor interacts with the query processor to generate appropriate codes. So these codes must be generated in tandem with the query processor to ensure that the instructions are in the best code that can be understood by the host DBMS. The same case to DDL compiler. It will be able to compile, that is, it will convert DDL statement into a set of tables containing the metadata. And these tables are stored in the system catalog where control information is stored in the data file headers. So the DDL compiler will compile or will convert this DDL statement so that they can be understood by the DBMS and they can be stored within the system or the host within the database itself. The other component or the final component is the catalog manager. We have also called it the dictionary manager. We have also referred to it as, which is the name, the metadata manager. So the catalog manager or the dictionary manager manages access to and information and maintains the system catalog. And the system catalog is accessed by most DBMS components. So the main work is to manage or to ensure who is, or that is, it manages who is able to access the system catalog or the metadata, and it is also responsible of knowing who is able to do what, to access, or that is, it also maintains that catalog where the data that is coming in, the data that is being deleted from the system catalog. Before I wind up, let's look at the database manager. And the database manager, I've said it's a bit major, or it's a major component. And we have this diagram over here showing the various components of a database manager. It is being derived from the diagram that we had up there. If you look at this diagram, before you can get to the database manager, on one side you're having a program object code. On the other side, you're having query processor. And on the other side, you're having the dictionary manager, or what you refer to as the system catalog. And at the middle here, we have the database manager. Then below the database manager, we're having the file manager, the access methods, the system buffers, and the database plus the metadata down here. So you're taking this part, starting from object code, query processor, data dictionary, but expounding or expanding the database manager so that you can see exactly what is contained within the database manager. So that's what we have in the diagram that you're having down here with the program code, query processor, catalog manager, all of them directed to this big rectangle here that we have referred to as the database manager. And below it, we have the file manager, access methods, so on, up to the database that we had up there. So the only thing that we are now concentrating on is this database manager and the various components that it has. The first thing that it has, it got a control or the authorization control. It is made up of integrity checker. Command processor is at the middle here. Remember, I said it is able to interpret those commands. It's also it has a query optimizer. It has a transaction manager. It also has a scheduler. And the data manager, it has a data manager. Remember, it is being referred to as a database manager. So the data manager also has two components, the buffer manager and the recovery manager. And right now, down here, I want us to look at the various functions or the various roles that are played by these components that you do have of the database manager, maybe starting with the authorization control. So let's go down here and look at the functions that are done by the various functions that we have up there. So the first is the authorization control. And as the name suggests, the authorization control is a module that checks whether the user has the necessary authorization to carry out the required operation. You have sent some requests into the database to check, to get some data. So the very first thing that it must be checked before those commands are processed, or those commands are interpreted ready for processing, you must check whether you have the permissions or you have the authority to do whatever you want to do in the database. If you have the authority, then your command will be processed, will be given a go-ahead, and some interpretation will be done to it, and you'll be allowed to carry on with the operation. The other component is the command processor. Once the system has checked and you found that you have the permissions to do to carry out the operations that you are doing, then your command is passed to this command processor, and the command, or there is the command processor, and the command processor will do what will do. Will just interpret your command into the language that they're supposed to be done, or to be, or that is the language that the DBMS understands best, so that they are ready for processing. The other component that you do have of the database manager is the integrity checker. And the integrity checker, it will ensure that any operation that is directed to the database passes the integrity check, or it passes all the necessary integrity constraints that you do have, such as the primary key, the relation, or the reference keys, and so on, or the foreign key, all those keys that you do have over there. It will check whether all of them has been surpassed before that operation can be allowed to move on. The same case here, if the commands or the instruction that you had given fails the integrity check, then they are stopped at this point. But if they passes the integrity check, they are moved on to be sent to the database. The other component is the query optimizer. This is all about ensuring that as many queries are done as they come, and those queries are achieved as in the most efficient way. So the query optimizer, it will determine the optimal strategy for query execution, or which is the best way to execute the query and get the intended results from that query, using the least number of resources as much as possible. There's the other component is the transaction manager. The module performs the required processing operations it receives from the transaction. So remember I defined the transaction yesterday in our previous lesson. We said these are actions that are intended to make some changes on the database or get some data from the database. So this module will perform, or will do what will assist in doing exactly what those transactions were meant to be done. The other component is the scheduler, and as the name suggests, it is responsible of doing some scheduling or creating some order, especially with the concurrent operations within the database. So it will ensure an order, especially to those operations or to those transactions that want to carry out or to carry out operations on a piece of data within the database, and those transactions are conflicting with one another. So the scheduler will be responsible of creating a schedule that will enable to do away without conflict. The other component is the recovery manager. The recovery manager is responsible or is the one that is responsible for ensuring that the database is consistent in all that is it is in a consistent state, even if there are some failures that comes in. It is able to do what it is responsible for transaction commit and transaction abort. In other words, it's able to finish the instructions. It is capable of undoing some of these transactions to ensure that the database is in the most consistent and stable state. The other, the final component is the buffer manager. The buffer manager is a module that is responsible for data transfer. And whenever we talk about buffer, you must be talking about two or more or two components that want to exchange data, but they are doing it at different rates, and we require some buffering to be done. And this buffer is also known as the cache. So you must be doing some of they're responsible for doing the buffer. That is a transfer of data between the main memory and the secondary storage. It's also responsible of the storage of cache. Whenever data is accessed for one time, whenever a second request to access the same data, you'll find that that data have been stored in the cache within the database. So this is basically the DBMS, and basically this component that we're referring to as the database manager. So with that, I want to stop at that for today. But before we do start, I'll send you again to go to chapter 2.5 and make these notes on the components of DBMS before our next lesson. With that, I thank you very much.